The morning of April 22nd, 1945, hung cold and grey over Bavaria. Captain James Hollis stood in the motor pool yard, checking his revolver for the third time since dawn broke. The frost clung to everything, coating the barbed wire in crystalline layers that caught what little light filtered through the clouds. Somewhere beyond the perimeter fence, the POW cage waited, filled with men whose war had already ended, even if they didn't quite know it yet. His Smith & Wesson Model 10 felt familiar in his hand. The serial number was worn smooth from years of handling. The cylinder had been counted and recounted so many times, the brass was polished to a dull shine. 6 rounds. 138 caliber bullet per chamber, 158 grains of lead that never wavered from their intended target. Around him, infantry lieutenants carried their .45s and made jokes about his weapon like it was something they'd all agreed was funny before the war started. "What are you going to do with that, Captain?" Lieutenant Morrison called out, grinning. "Annoy us to death." Hollis didn't answer. He just spun the cylinder one more time, counted the brass, and clicked it shut. 4 years as a Chicago cop had taught him plenty about what mattered in a fight. It wasn't the size of your gun. It was whether you could hit what you aimed at. Backup was 10 minutes away on the south side. One wrong decision meant a widow and a funeral, and he'd learned that lesson early enough that it stuck with him through every year since. The .45 could knock a man down if you hit him anywhere in the general vicinity. The .38 was better if you wanted precision, if you wanted to place your shot exactly where it needed to go. Division intelligence had flagged General Major Wilhelm Brandt for immediate transport to Corps headquarters. The man had commanded artillery around Cherbourg and might know locations of SS officers in hiding. Hollis drew the assignment, 87 miles through territory that was partially secured at best. Highway 17 south toward Munich. His colonel had clapped him on the shoulder that morning with the kind of smile that meant something clever was coming. "Try not to lose this one, James," the colonel had said, "and maybe borrow a real gun." Now Sergeant Daniel Kozak sat behind the wheel of the Willys Jeep, fingers drumming nervous rhythms on the steering wheel while they waited for the prisoner. Kozak was 23, wire-tight with anger, the kind of soldier who gripped things too hard and whose jaw muscles jumped whenever he had to translate German. He'd grown up speaking Hamburg German with his grandmother, which made him invaluable as an interpreter and intolerable as a passenger because he understood every word the prisoners muttered under their breath. "You really think we're going to make it through with just us?" Kozak asked. "We've made it through worse," Hollis said. "Yeah, but those times we had more than a pop gun." Hollis slid the .38 into its holster. "Then let's hope I don't need to use it." General Major Wilhelm Brandt emerged from the processing tent flanked by 2 MPs, his wrists caught in restraints that caught the morning light. He was something past 50, Prussian straight even in defeat, the kind of officer who probably inspected his own shoelaces before surrendering. His uniform had been stripped of insignia, but you could still see the ghost lines where medals used to hang, faint outlines of authority that no longer meant anything. He looked at Hollis with the polite contempt of a chess master regarding someone playing checkers. "Captain, I am told you will transport me." "That's right, General, 87 miles. Should take about 4 hours if the roads stay clear." "And if they do not stay clear?" "Then we'll figure it out." Hollis gestured to the jeep. "Sergeant Kozak will drive. You'll sit in back. Don't try anything stupid, and we'll all get home for dinner." Brandt almost smiled. "I have nowhere to run, Captain. My home is likely rubble by now. My family—" Something flickered behind his eyes before he stopped himself. "I have nowhere to run." They loaded him into the back seat. Kozak muttered something in German that made Brandt's eyebrows rise. Hollis caught the word for traitor and shot Kozak a look that said they'd talk about it later. The jeep coughed to life, 60 horsepower straining under 40 pounds of extra gear. Rations, ammunition, first aid kit, jerry cans of fuel, everything they'd need if things went bad. The morning was 42 degrees and overcast. Visibility stretched maybe 2 miles before the world dissolved into grey. The kind of weather that made you feel like everything beyond the horizon had simply ceased to exist. The first 30 miles passed without incident. Brandt sat quietly, watching the ruined German countryside roll past. burned-out farmhouses, cratered roads, refugees trudging west with everything they owned tied to their backs. At one point, he asked about Chicago, said he'd visited in 1936 for an industrial exposition. Hollis told him about the stockyards, the lakefront, the way the city smelled like steel and ambition. They almost had a conversation. Then they reached mile marker 34, and everything changed. The roadblock appeared 100 yards ahead. Figures in the road, a makeshift barrier constructed from logs and scrap metal. But the uniforms were wrong. Not American olive drab. Waffen SS camouflage. 8 or 10 men, deserters trying to liberate German officers from transport convoys. Kozak hit the brakes hard enough to throw Hollis forward against the dashboard. Contact front. Hollis ordered Brandt down and stepped out with his .38 visible. The SS lieutenant in charge sneered, all bravado and wild eyes, the kind of mid-level fanatic who mistook volume for authority. "The Americans send children with toys," the lieutenant shouted in German. Then he saw Brandt through the window, and his face transformed completely. "General Major, we are here to rescue you." His men started surrounding the jeep. Hollis had maybe 10 seconds to decide how this ended. He raised the .38, not aiming yet, just showing his hand. "This toy holds 6 rounds, he said in careful phrasebook German. "I was a Chicago cop for 4 years. I have never missed inside 20 feet. First round is yours. Who wants to be second?" The SS lieutenant didn't back down. If anything, Hollis's threat seemed to amuse him, the way a wolf might be amused by a rabbit showing teeth. He barked orders in rapid German, and his men began advancing in a loose semicircle, rifles at low ready. 8 men, 6 rounds. The math didn't work, and everyone standing in that road knew it. But Hollis didn't flinch. He kept the .38 steady, arm extended. His voice stayed calm as Sunday morning. "I don't want to shoot anyone today, but if you force my hand, 6 of you are going home in boxes. The war is almost over. Seems like a stupid time to die." Behind him, Kozak had his Monet carbine out now, adding 15 rounds to the equation. Still not enough. The deserters kept coming, boots crunching gravel, close enough now that Hollis could see the exhaustion carved into their faces. Men who'd been running for weeks, sleeping in ditches, eating whatever they could steal. Dangerous because they had nothing left to lose. Then Hollis did something that made Kozak's breath catch. He lowered the .38 slightly, not holstering it, just relaxing his aim. He looked directly at the SS lieutenant. "What's your name?" The question landed like a stone in still water. The lieutenant blinked, thrown completely off his script. "What?" "Your name." "I'm Captain James Hollis." "You want to kill me? At least you can do is introduce yourself first." The man's face twisted with confusion and anger. "Obersturmführer Roth," he finally said. "Roth." Hollis nodded, like they'd just been introduced at a dinner party. "The war's over, Roth. It's been over since Stalingrad. You know it. Your men know it. Go home. See if your family's still alive." Kozak picked up the thread, translating with added emphasis, his German sharp and fluent. "Captain Hollis has never fired his weapon at a prisoner, but he shot 7 men who gave him no choice. 7 rounds, 7 hits, 7 funerals. He doesn't miss." That part was true. Hollis had stopped POW riots in France and Belgium without ever wounding a bystander. Precision fire that dropped ringleaders and froze mobs in their tracks. The story had spread through MP companies, acquiring mythic weight with each retelling. Now Kozak was weaponizing that reputation, and Hollis could see it working. Some of Roth's men were exchanging glances, the kind that said maybe this wasn't worth it. But Roth's pride was bleeding out in the road, and desperate men did stupid things to stop the bleeding. "You cannot stop all of us, American," Roth said. "Even if you kill me, my men will—" The voice came from the jeep, command sharp, despite the wrist restraints. General Major Wilhelm Brandt sat up straight in the back seat, every inch the Prussian officer despite 2 years of losing. "I am General Major Brandt, 276th Artillery Division. I order you to stand down." Roth's face went purple. You're a prisoner. You have no authority." "I have the authority of rank and the clarity of defeat," Brandt said, switching to German now. his voice carrying the weight of every parade ground he'd ever commanded. Look at yourself. Look at your men. The Führer is hiding in a bunker in Berlin while children and old men die for his delusions. The Americans are offering you a chance to walk away. Take it. One of Roth's men, older than the others with corporal stripes still visible on his sleeve, lowered his rifle, just a few inches, but enough. Then another man did the same, and another. The circle was breaking. Roth could feel his authority crumbling like wet paper. His hand moved toward his sidearm. A Walther P-38 on his hip. Hollis's 38 came up fast. Hammer cocked now, front sight settling on Roth's center mass. 18 feet, optimal range. The double-action trigger pull was 12 pounds, but single action, which he'd just engaged by thumbing back the hammer, was 4 pounds. A breath would set it off. Don't, Hollis said quietly. I gave you a way out. Don't make me take it back. For 11 minutes they stood frozen, 9:47 to 9:58 by Kozak's watch, though it felt like hours. Sweat ran down Hollis's back despite the 40-degree morning. His trigger finger ached from holding pressure just below the breakpoint. If Roth drew, Hollis would fire. And then everything would go to hell in the half-second it took the other deserters to decide between loyalty and survival. But Roth was reading his men's faces now, seeing the mutiny in their eyes. These weren't fanatics. They were scared kids in scary uniforms, playing soldier until someone called their bluff. And Hollis had just called it with 6 rounds of calm, cold certainty. Roth cursed, something vicious about Americans and cowards and the Reich, but his hand came away from the Walther. He spat in the dirt, turned, and stalked toward the tree line. His men followed, melting into the forest like wolves slipping back into shadows. Within 30 seconds the road was empty except for tire tracks and spent adrenaline. Hollis exhaled slowly, carefully lowered the hammer, and holstered the 38. His hands didn't shake until 5 miles later, when Kozak finally spoke. You think they'll come back? No, Hollis said. They just wanted permission to quit. We gave it to them. Brandt was quiet for the next 10 miles, watching the ruined countryside roll past like a man studying his own autopsy. Farmhouses reduced to chimney stacks, orchards shredded by artillery, refugees trudging west with hollow eyes and everything they owned tied in bedsheets. The Germany he'd fought to preserve was already ash and memory. Finally he spoke. Why did you not shoot, Captain? Hollis kept his eyes on the road. Because I didn't have to. That is not an answer. You had clear justification. Obersturmführer Roth was threatening a military operation. A court would have absolved you. Maybe. Hollis adjusted his grip on the jeep's frame as Kozak swerved around a crater. But I'd still have to write 7 letters to 7 mothers. Already wrote one last November. The air changed. Brandt went very still in the back seat. Your brother? He asked quietly. Yeah, Tommy, infantry, Hurtgen Forest. Sniper got him while he was carrying a wounded sergeant back to the aid station. Hollis's voice stayed level. Professional, the way it always did when he talked about Tommy. Like he was filing a report, instead of describing how his chest had caved in when the telegram arrived. He was 23, got a bronze star. Mum keeps it on the mantel next to his picture. Brandt said nothing for a long moment. Then, my son, Kent, 1943. He was a bombardier on a Heinkel 111. The RAF stopped him mid-flight. They said it was quick, clean. Whether that was mercy or just what they told themselves, I couldn't say. Kozak glanced into the rearview mirror, his face revealing nothing at all. The jeep continued down Highway 17, its engine grinding steadily into the silence between them. 2 men, who'd spent years devoted to destroying each other's nations, now sat barely an arm's length apart, bound together by a single loss that went deeper than any border or military rank could reach. I saw the camps, Brandt said suddenly, as though the words had been trapped behind his teeth for months waiting to escape. Not the worst ones. But I saw them, he continued. I know what I saw. When we moved through in 43, there were trains. Smoke rising endlessly. He stared down at his bound hands like they might contain answers. I told myself it was necessary. Brutal, yes, but necessary for final victory. War demands terrible choices. Someone must make them, I replied. And now, Hollis asked quietly, now my family is missing. My country is in ruins. And I wonder, Brandt's voice fractured slightly for the first time, that Prussian control finally showing its cracks. I wonder if I chose blindness because seeing would have forced me to choose between my oath and my conscience. Looking away seemed easier. Calculating trajectories and blast radius, and pretending the mathematics somehow freed me from the mathematics I refused to do. Kozak's hands were locked tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. Hollis could sense the fury radiating from him like heat off engine metal, the kind of rage that wanted simple revenge for something impossibly complex. But this wasn't the moment for that reckoning. Not now. I became a cop to look after people, Hollis explained carefully. Worked the south side of Chicago for 4 years straight. Broke up fights, talked down drunks, pulled kids away from situations before they got worse. Then the war came. Suddenly, I'm guarding men I'd just as soon shoot and walk away from. He pulled out his canteen, drank, held it toward Brandt, who refused. But my father taught me something when I was 16. He said, the law isn't always just, but it's all we've got standing between us and savagery. So I follow it, even when it costs. Especially when it costs. They reached a U.S. checkpoint at mile 61, the 101st Airborne Mobile Command Post at coordinates 48.1 degrees north, 10.8 degrees east. Hot coffee in tin cups, K-rations that tasted like salted cardboard. 15-minute stop while an infantry captain verified Brandt's transfer papers. The clouds were breaking apart now. Temperature climbing toward 48 degrees, the kind of spring morning that made you believe somehow the world could still recover. An infantry major noticed the .38 on Hollis's hip and smirked. That your sidearm, Captain? My grandmother carries bigger protection. Before Hollis could answer, Brandt stepped in with careful English. Your captain is a skilled man, Major. I have observed it myself. Perhaps you should ask him to teach you what actual skill resembles. The major's smile vanished. He mumbled something about checking perimeters and departed quickly. Kozak's nearly choked on his coffee. They climbed back into the jeep, 61 miles behind, 26 still ahead. The road stretched before them empty and clear. For the first time since dawn broke, it seemed they might actually reach their destination. Hollis allowed himself a sliver of hope. The dangerous kind that loosens your guard. That's when the artillery rumbled in the distance and everything collapsed into chaos. Mile 68. The cannon fire grew louder now. Heavy, resonant booms that made the earth vibrate beneath the jeep. German 88s from the sound, not American 105s. Kozak's eased the jeep as smoke climbed from the woods 2 miles east, thick and black against the pale spring sky. An infantry runner waved them down before the next checkpoint, his face streaked with grime and something darker. Roads are cut, Captain. SS Commando Group broke through this morning. Overran a field hospital. Took American wounded, holding them hostage. He was breathing hard, as if he'd run the entire distance. Division's plugging the gap, but it's going to take hours. You need to backtrack to the last intersection, head west on the secondary route. Hollis unfolded his map, traced the options with a finger. Backtrack 40 miles, add 3 hours, arrive after nightfall. Or his finger stopped on a thin line threading through forest, take the logging trail. Unmapped terrain, probably mined, definitely not swept by engineers, but it cuts 8 miles and keeps us moving forward. What do you think? He asked Kozak's. The sergeant stared toward the tree line like he could see through to whatever waited beyond the pines. I think we wait for armor. Let the big guns punch through, then we follow behind them. Could be 6 hours, could be more, could be landmines. Could be more deserters. Could be 100 things that turn us into vapor and blood. His voice was tight as wire. Sir. Hollis turned back to Brandt. The general was watching him with those analytical eyes, the kind that had spent 2 decades measuring trajectories and acceptable losses. What would you do, General? I would weigh the strategic value of one prisoner against the tactical risk of uncleared terrain. Brandt paused. But I suspect you are not asking for strategic analysis, Captain. You are asking whether I am worth the risk. Am I? Brandt's eyes shifted toward the tree line and back. Something passed between them, an understanding built on shared sorrow and 3 hours of careful, honest talk. I know where 3 SS commanders are hiding. I know which Wehrmacht officers will testify against them. I know locations of munitions dumps large enough to level a town if they fall to the wrong hands. He held Hollis's gaze steady. I am worth the gamble, but only if you believe I will keep my word. Hollis made his decision. We go through. Stay sharp, Kozaks muttered something in German that wasn't complimentary, but he turned the jeep onto the logging trail. The forest engulfed them within 50 yards, thick pines filtering the afternoon light into cathedral gloom. Roots thrust up through the path like arthritic fingers. The jeep crawled at 15 miles per hour, engine whining in low gear, every pothole and rock a possible trigger for explosives buried years before. They made 3 miles before everything fell apart. Mile 71. Shadows moving wrong among the trees. American uniforms, but the bearing was off, too rigid, too formal, stolen gear worn like an uncomfortable disguise. German soldiers desperate enough to wear enemy colors, gambling that no one would look too closely. One of them spotted the jeep, saw Brandt in the back seat, and watched his expression transform from fear to rage in a single heartbeat. Traitor, he screamed in German, raising a Kar 98 rifle. You betrayed us. Hollis barely had time to shout, he's a prisoner, before the rifle cracked. The bullet punched through the windshield, missed Kozaks by inches, and the sergeant jerked the wheel hard. The jeep slid sideways, caught a root, crashed into a ditch at 20 miles per hour. Hollis was thrown clear, landed hard on his shoulder, the .38 still somehow in his grip, because instinct doesn't answer to physics. When he looked up, 3 Germans were dragging Brandt from the vehicle. They were shouting about traitors and collaboration and justice, their voices high and fractured by exhaustion and fear. One of them couldn't have been older than 19, all gangly limbs and barely grown features in an oversized uniform. He pulled a Luger from his belt and pressed it against Brandt's temple. This is what happens to traitors, the boy screamed. Hollis shouted, halt, but they didn't stop. The boy's finger began tightening, and Hollis had maybe 2 seconds to decide something that would follow him forever. His .38 came up smooth and practiced, 1,000 hours at the Chicago range compressed into one movement. Front sight on the boy's right shoulder, not center mass, not the head, just the shoulder, because maybe, just maybe, he could end this without creating another mother's grief. The distance was 23 feet. The angle was 17 degrees upward, because Hollis was still on the ground. His finger found the trigger, 12 pounds of double-action pressure that felt like an enormous weight. The .38 cracked sharp and clean through the forest like a whip. The 158-grain bullet struck the boy's shoulder at 820 feet per second, spun him hard, the Luger tumbling into dead leaves. He went down screaming, clutching the wound, blood pouring between his fingers, but not arterial, not immediately fatal, just agony and the sudden realization that war wasn't abstract anymore. The other 2 froze. Hollis was already rolling behind a log, .38 tracking, 5 rounds remaining. Kozaks had his Mosin Nagant out, dazed but operational, and Brandt, still in cuffs, kicked one German in the knee, dropped him hard. Next one center mass, Hollis shouted in German, drop your weapons. They did, hands rising, the fight drained from them like water through a punctured bucket. The wounded boy was crying now, that high, keening sound young men make when invincibility suddenly evaporates. Hollis moved to him carefully, .38 lowered, but ready, and knelt beside him. The shoulder wound was clean, through and through, brachial plexus damaged but no arterial strike, excruciating but survivable with basic medical care. Hold still, Hollis said in German, pulling his first aid kit free. The boy flinched back, eyes wild with terror and pain. I'm not going to hurt you. Already did that part. He worked quickly, sulfur powder on both wounds. Pressure bandages wrapped tight to stop the bleeding. Morphine syrette jabbed into the boy's leg. The kid's breathing steadied as the drug took hold, tears still flowing, but panic receding into shock. Dresden, the boy whispered. I'm from Dresden. Haven't heard from my family since February. The bombing, the firestorm, his voice cracked. I just want to go home. Hollis thought about Tommy, about Brandt's son burning over Kent, about all the mothers receiving telegrams instead of sons. He thought about the letter he'd almost sent his mother last week, the one where he'd admitted he didn't understand his own choices anymore. He'd torn it up because doubting himself felt like betraying everyone who hadn't survived. "You'll make it," Hollis said quietly. "The war's almost done. Find them." Kozak's got the jeep running. The frame was bent, but the engine caught. Good enough to limp the remaining 16 miles. They loaded Brandt back in, left the 3 Germans sitting by the trail with their wounded companion and enough medical supplies to reach a collection point. The boy watched them disappear into the forest with eyes that would probably replay this moment forever. They rolled into division headquarters at 16:40 hours, 4 hours behind schedule, covered in mud and blood and the kind of exhaustion that soaks into your bones like cold water. Hollis delivered Brandt to intelligence officers in a concrete building that had once been a schoolhouse, handed over his .38 for ballistics examination, standard procedure after any shot fired, no exceptions even for captains. His colonel was waiting in the hallway, face like a gathering storm. "You endangered a high-value asset, took an unsecured route without authorization, and discharged your weapon in an unauthorized engagement." Colonel Bradford's voice could cut through steel. "You're on administrative leave pending investigation. Dismissed." Hollis saluted, said nothing, walked to the motor pool where Kozak's was already on his 3rd cigarette, staring into nothing. They sat on the jeep's hood as the sun dropped below the Bavarian hills, painting the ruins gold and crimson like devastation itself was beautiful. "You did what was right," Kozak said finally. "Did I? You could have killed him, sent a mass, he'd be dead before he touched ground, but you didn't." Kozak's flicked ash into the dirt. "That matters." That night, Hollis sat in his billet trying to write his mother. Told her he'd shot someone today, first time since Belgium in '44, said he was tired, said he didn't know what he was fighting for anymore. Whether mercy was strength or just cowardice wearing a prettier uniform. He made it 3 paragraphs before crumpling the page and throwing it away. Some truths were too dark to send through the mail. April 24th, 0800 hours. Hollis was called to the colonel's office, expecting formal charges, possibly even court-martial for disobeying orders. Instead, he found Brandt there, cleaned up and wearing fresh Wehrmacht uniform without insignia, and an intelligence officer with a translated report covering Bradford's desk. "General Major Brandt has been extremely cooperative," the officer said, providing locations of 3 SS commanders in hiding, maps to munitions depots, names of Wehrmacht officers ready to testify against war criminals. His intelligence has already led to 2 major arrests. Bradford looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. "The general says you're why he's talking." Brandt stood, formal and precise despite everything. Through an interpreter, he said, "Captain Hollis spared the boy in the forest. I have known officers, German and American, who would have executed him for convenience, for safety, simply because dead men need less paperwork than living ones. Captain Hollis did not. That is when I understood. Not all soldiers are the same. Some still fight for something genuine." The interpreter kept his voice level, but Hollis heard the weight underneath. Brandt was offering absolution for a choice Hollis hadn't known he needed. Bradford cleared his throat. "You're cleared of all charges, Captain. Your weapon will be returned." He paused, and something resembling respect crossed his features. "The ballistics report notes single shot fired, 23-foot range, non-lethal wound, textbook marksmanship under duress. Shooter exercised exemplary restraint." Another pause. Maybe there's something to that pop gun after all. The .38 came back that afternoon, cleaned and loaded, 6 rounds ready for decisions. Hollis hoped he'd never have to make another one.